Hey all, and welcome to this video where I'm going to show how to make this cool hovering effect using Vue3, Tailwind, and GSAP. And we got a lot of things going on here. So we've got the image that's moving around with the cursor and the text that slides to the left when we hover them. And then also you can see that we have this kind of like parallax effect on the image itself as soon as we move the cursor both horizontally and vertically. And I'm going to show how to implement all of this using the Composition API and Vue3. Now let's get started. So to get started, we need to install Vue3, and I've gone here to the Vue documentation. And if I just scroll down a bit here to the section where the install script, I can just copy this npx init over to my terminal and just paste it in here and press enter. Then we can start off by giving our project a name. And if you're just creating it in the same folder, you can, instead of giving it a folder name, just set a dot as the value. And for the package name, we're just going to set something like hover list. And we're going to say node to TypeScript and node to JSX and node to the Vue router and node to state management, as well as node to testing and yes to ESLint and prettier. So we have a code formatter. We can see now that we've got all the files, and now we're just going to run yarn to install all the dependencies. And once that is done, we are ready to open the project in Visual Studio Code. So the first thing I like to do is create a new file called .prettier.rc, and this is just for my Prettier plugin in VS Code to activate. So it's just going to be an empty object as the content of the file. And the next thing I want to do is just to remove all the boilerplate files that we don't need. So that is basically everything except for the main.css file. So I'm just going to delete everything here from the assets folder except the main, which is just going to clean up so it's an empty file. And then inside of my components, I'm just going to delete everything. And then from the app.vue file, I'm just going to clean it down. So it's just got an empty script tag and an empty template. And just going to remove the style tag completely. And now we're ready to get started. Next, we need to install Tailwind. And if I just go to the Tailwind documentation page for Vue3 and Vite, and we scroll down to the install script here, we can copy these dependencies and jump into VS Code, do a yarn add dev, and install them. And next we need to initialize the configuration file. So I'm just going to copy in the npx script and run it, which is going to create a tailwind.config and a post.css file. And now just to complete it off, we need to go into the tailwind config and just paste in the content that we just copied so it looks in the right files. And then lastly, we need to copy the directives and put into the main.css file. And now we're ready to test if Tailwind is working. So if we go to app.vue and open the template tag here, we can just set in a simple test by putting in maybe a h1. And let's just give it a class of font mono text 2xl and maybe underline. And let's set the text to hello world, save it. And now let's run the dev server using yarn dev and open it in the browser. And now we can see that Tailwind is initialized. So to get started, let's create a new component inside of the components directory. And I like to make a folder instead of just a file when I know there's going to be more related components. So let's create a folder here called list. And inside of the list, we just create a file called index.vue. And to start it off, let's create an unordered list with a list item inside of it. And let's just put in a title for now. And inside of our app view file, we're going to use the list component. So I'm just going to delete this boilerplate here and add the list. And with my auto importer here, it's quite easy. So let's save it and see how it looks in the browser. We can see we got the title out here now. And next we want to add some boilerplate data. And I got this list prepared with some titles and images. And we're just going to pass them in as a property to the list component. So items. And then inside of our list component, we want to define the properties. So let's do a define props and set the items as a type of array, and let's set it to be required as well, so required true. And now to use the items in our template, we don't actually have to do anything. As soon as we have defined the properties, they are immediately available inside of our template, kind of like how it was with Vue3. So down here we can just do a v4 item in items. Let's output the title here. And we need to set a key as well, so let's just use the title as the key since it's unique. So title. Oh, we got a typo here. And now if you look at the browser, we can see we got all the titles out. And I already know that I rather want to have the line as a separate component. So I'm just going to copy this line and I'm just going to make a new file. And I'm going to call it list item.vue. And then inside of the template tags, I just want to paste the li that copied before into the template. And we can now take the key and the v4 and just cut out. And then instead is going to define a new property up here. And then I'm going to do one for the item, the individual item, and that is a type of an object. And I set it to required as well, so required true. And now inside of our index file, we can instead place it with the list item and then paste in the key and the v4 that we cut out previously, and then pass in the item as a property. So item. And if you look in the browser, we can see we have the same as before. And inside of our list item, we're now ready to apply some styling. So I'm going to start with adding the class attribute and adding a border to the bottom. And I want it to be a light gray border, so I'm going to do border gray 400. And next we're going to set the cursor to pointer. And oh, I got a typo here for the border. There we go. And now we've got the light border under each title. And inside of our list item now, I want to wrap it all in a div. And inside of the div here, I'm just going to replace the title and then add some classes to it. So I want to have it offset a bit from the left. So I'm doing padding left 32. And then on the y-axis, I want to give it a padding of 12. And I make it a flex container. And I want the items to be aligned at the beginning or at the top, so item start. And then I want to have the spacing on the x-axis to be 8, and I want it to be position relative. And we're going to set the set index for 20. Now you can see we got a bit more space between the items. And the next thing we want to do, if we look at the demo, is we want to apply this small number at the left. So what we're going to do is to add a new element here on top of the title. So we're just going to do a span, and then let's just hard code a number in for now and add some classes. So we want it to be like a small text size. So we're doing text SM, and let's do it a light gray as well. So maybe gray 500. And let's just see how that looks. Yeah, we got them next to each other. And then the title here, we're just going to wrap that in a H3. And for the class, let's do 8XL and paste in the title here. Let's just see. And now we can see that like the small span is overflowing the text. And it's probably because of the kerning of the font that I'm using. So I think that we're just going to push the span a bit down. So to do that, we're just going to do translate on the y-axis and maybe do it 3. Yeah, there we go. And next we want to wrap it in a parentheses. So, oh, of course, the number. So there we go. Yeah, looking great. So how do we implement this number? And I think that we need to go into the index file, and then we want to pass on the index as a property to a list item. So let's just do index, then pass in the index. And to get the index, we just need to wrap this item in the parentheses and then add index as the second parameter, which is going to be the zero-based key of the array of the items. So now inside of our list item, we're just going to have to define the index as a property, which is going to be type of number and required true. And then down here, we can just add the index. But now we can see that one thing is that it's zero-based. So we're starting with a 0, and the other thing is that it's a single character, and we rather want it to be like 2 characters long. So an easy way that we can kind of like accommodate this is to just add a 0 here in front of our index and then add 1 to the index. And that's kind of give us what we want. But the problem here is, as soon as you work with a more dynamic solution, that if you have more than 10 items in here, so let's just check. You can see that now we're going from 2 characters to 3 characters. So that's not really what we want. So if just undo all of this again. So what we rather want is to maybe implement a computer property. So let's just make a new const here and make it a number. And let's make a computer property. And instead of here, we want to return the index. But in order to like access the properties, we need to define it as a const. So const props. And then down here was our script. We can do props.index. And let's convert it into a string. And then just do pat start. And the max length of the string we want is 2. And the filler we want is 0. And we can just add the 1 to it. And then instead of the index down here, we just need to echo out the number. And we can remove the 0 here at the front. And now we got exactly what we want. So next thing is that we need to implement the animation for the hover on the text. So the way we want to do it, if we just look at the demo, is that every time that we hover a list item, the text kind of like shift out to the left and then coming back, obviously, when we leave the list item. So the way we want to implement this is to start off by installing the GSAP node module. So I'm just going to stop the process here and do a yarn add dev GSAP. And once that is done, I'm just going to import it up here at the beginning of my file. So import GSAP from GSAP. And next we want to go down to the div that we applied the padding lift to. And we want to add a mouse enter event. So add mouse enter. And let's just create a new method called onEnter and apply it here under the computer property. So on const onEnter equals a new method. So what we want to do at the beginning is that we want to kill all tweens that's currently being executed on the element. So gsap.kill tweens off. And to access the element, we need to make it into a reference. So let's do a ref and then EL. And I like to put a $sign in front so I know that it's an HTML element. So up here, we're just doing const EL equals a ref with a default of null. And we need to import ref up here. There we go. And now instead of a kill tweens off, we could do el.value to kill all current executing tweens of this element. And the next thing we need to do is to animate the padding left. So el.value and then padding left, and let's set it to 0. And let's set the duration to 0.335 and set the ease to power 2 dot ease in out. And we need to import the power 2 up here at GSAP. There we go. And to see if it's working, we need to restart the dev process down here. So yarn dev, and then let's watch the browser. Oh, we got a typo up here. It's GSAP. And there we go. You can see now that every time we hover one of the list items, it animates to the left. But you can also see that as soon as we leave the item, it doesn't animate back. So the way we implement that is actually quite simple. All we need to do is to copy our onEnter method that we just did and just rename it into maybe onLeave. And instead of padding left, we're going to set it to 9rem. And then down here on the element, we need to add an onMouseLeave and then call the method onLeave. And I know that 9rem corresponds to 32 in Tailwind, so that's why I put 9rem up here. And now you can see that every time we hover on the list item, it animates in, and as soon as we leave the item, it animates back again with ease. And if we move fast, you can see that it doesn't clutter up because of the kill tweens off that we put in at the beginning of each method. And what I can see now that right now it's going all the way out to the left and kind of like cuts off. So I think we're going to add some spacing to the list. So if we go back to the code into the app.vue file and just wrap the list in a div, then we can set some classes. So on the x-axis, let's set a padding of 10. And then on the y-axis, let's set it to something like 32 to push it a bit down from the top. And yeah, just need to wrap it here. And let's see what that gives us. You can see already now it's more center and push down to the top and more like what we got in the demo. So that's how we implement the text animation. So now we're ready to look at the hovering image that we need to apply. So I think that just for a start, I want to go into the index.vue and just kind of like place an element underneath here just to start it out, and then I might migrate it into its own component. So the first thing which I'm just going to do is to make a div and apply some styles to it. So let's start off by giving in a width, and let's set it to 30 view width, and let's set the height to 18 view width. So we have like a dynamic width based on the screen size. And then we want to make it fixed and apply it all the way up to the top left corner. And maybe just set a set index for 10. So it's going just below the text. If you remember, we set the set index here to 20. And maybe just for testing, let's set a BG green, I don't know, maybe 500. So just so we can see how it looks. And let's look at what we got now. So right now we have like this green box that's just gonna sit in the top left corner of the screen, even though we scroll because it's fixed. And what we want to do now is to make it follow the cursor around. And to do that, we need to install a module called Vue3. So I'm just going to do yarn add dev add Vue3/core and install that. Then let's run the dev server again. Now inside Vue3, we got these helper methods that we can use, these composables, and one of them is this use event listener. And the big difference from using the Vue3 composable and just using the regular document.add event listener is that it automatically adds the bindings on mounted and on before destroy, so you don't have to worry about if things are going to be created and destroyed properly. So yeah, really recommendable to use this. So the first thing we're going to do is to import it. So import use event listener from Vue3/core. And then here under the props, let's do a use event listener. Let's attach this to the window. Let's make it on mouse move, and then have a callback that accepts an event. And then here, and we need to get the client X and Y value, and we need to add them to two references, two properties that we need to create. So we're gonna create a property here called const X equals ref, and default is 0, and the same for Y. And then down here, we're gonna use x.value equals e.client x, and do y.value equals client y. Now that we got these two properties, we can actually just attach them directly to here. So inside of the style, we can do top is equal to y, and then pixels, and then left is x, but pixels. There we go. Let's see what we got now. So now you can see that every time we move our mouse, the box is moving with our mouse. But as you also can see that it's aligned to the top left corner of the box, and rather want it to be centered on the cursor. So an easy way to do that is to use transform. So down here, let's just do minus translate x 1.5 and minus translate y 1.5. And now you can see, now it's centered to the cursor. And one other thing that we might want to do is to set pointer events none, so it doesn't interfere with any content that might overlap or anything. So already now I think that we should just move this into its own component. So within our list folder, let's create a new file called listbox.vue. And here with the boilerplate, let's just copy this whole div into the template. And let's take the use event listener and the X property and add it up here to the setup. And we need the import here as well. So we're just gonna add them here at the top. Save. And then down here now, let's just import listbox. And we should have the exact same thing. If we're going back to the demo real quick, then we can see that every time we move the mouse, it's kind of like, you know, have a bit of delay of following the mouse, so it doesn't feel as chunky as what we got now. And the way we do that is to use the lerp function to kind of like make it a bit more slowly catching up with that cursor. And to do that, we need to go into our list box, and instead of kind of like writing the values directly down here, we want to kind of like have a middle station of values. So let's do a const position x equals ref 0 and const position y equals ref 0. And now that we've got this, we need to implement a lerp or interpolate function that is kind of like going to calculate the position. Now, since we already got GSAP installed, I think that we should just use their interpolate function. So let's just import interpolate from GSAP. And in order to use the interpolate and kind of like calculate these values, we need to use a request animation frame callback. And since we got Vue use, we can just use raf fn, and then down here, let's use the request animation frame. Let's say position x. I can see I have a typo here. Let's just rewrite it. Position x dot value equals interpolate. We can see that we have the start value, the end value, and the progression number. So the start value is going to be the same. And then the end value, so where we want it to end, is going to be x, the value. And now our progression is going to be 0, 0, 8. And then we're just going to copy this down and make it for the y as well. There we go. And then instead of using the x and the y here, we're just going to use position y and position x. And let's see what we got. Oh, I can see we got a bug here. Yeah, it's because that we need to add the /all in order to get the interpolate function. And now we refresh. There we go. We can see now that the box is following the cursor, but a bit more elastic and a bit more delay, but it's catching up. So that's the way we kind of like make it more organic and, you know, more Awwwards like to look at. Now let's try to get some images into the box. So I think that what we're just going to do is go into the index file and then just pass the items into the list box as a property. So let's just write items is equal to items. And then inside of the list box up here, let's define the properties. Define props, items, type, array, required, true. And then down here, we're gonna insert a new div. So let's say div, and then class, let's set it to width full, height full, absolute, top 0, left 0. let's do the v4 loop. So v4 item in items, and let's set the key to item.title, and then in here, just do an image tag, set the source to item.image. Let's see what we got now. So now you can see we got the images, but yeah, they're floating all over each other and not looking that nice. So I think that we need to have an overflow hidden up here to kind of like cut it. And then on the image, let's add the v full and the h full and set object to cover. So you kind of like get the image to cover and adjust itself to be within the box. Next, we're going to set each item here to be opacity 0, so we can't see it. In order to show one of the images, we need to figure out which of the line items that we're currently hovering. So I think that within our list item, we should emit a change as soon as we enter an element. So to define the emits, we're going to do const emit, define emits, and then do enter. And then down here on enter function, we can do emit, enter. We can even set like the index and that with us. So do props.index. And then outside in our list component, we can listen for the enter event. Here we could set like an active index equals to event. And event is kind of like a magic property that is available here that is going to reference whatever we sent along as the first parameter in the submit function. We need to define the active index. So const active index equals ref null. And we need to import the ref. Import ref from Vue. And then in here, we can set the active index. Active index. So now in the list box, let's accept that. And it's a type of number and required false because it can't be null. So default is just going to be null. There we go. Let's start off by making maybe a watcher to the active index. So up here from Vue, let's import watch. And then let's just do it down here. Let's watch for the props.active index. And we're going to get two params. We get the current, like the new value, and we're gonna get the previous value. Right now, if we get like the number 0 back, so we want to show the first image, how can we even, pick out the image down here? So what we could do is create a ref, and then we could make it into a callback. So we get an element, and then we could do maybe images, and then do index equals element, and then we need to add the index down here, and then we need to make a new const images equals ref and an array. There we go. So now we have all the elements representing the index of the items array. So what we can do here now is to go if current is not equal to null, then we're going to GSAP 2 and get the images value and the current index, And then we're gonna animate to opacity 1, duration maybe 0.445, ease, how to, ease in out. Let's make sure we import both GSAP and Power2 in here. And we're just gonna do the exact same thing here. So if we have the pref, then we are just gonna animate it to 0. Let's see how that looks. We got an error right off the bat. So we are missing the const here in front of the properties. So const props. There we go. Let's see. So now we can see that every time we hover over one of the items, the image corresponding to the line is animating in. I'm just going to close the DevTools here. And right now the green background is just make my eyes hurt. So I'm just going to take that out. And now you can see, if you're just going to refresh, that when I start hovering the Nike and then going down, the image is fading, cross-fading in. But right now, when we leave the page with the cursor, the image just stays there, and as well down here at the bottom. So we need to implement an animation that triggers when we enter the whole list and when we leave the list. So let's do that now. So inside of the list box here, let's start off by making a new method that we call animate in. And what we would like to happen if we see the demo real quick. So what we can see here is when we enter the list, the image is appearing, and when we leave the list, it's disappearing. So to start this off, let's start by try to create the animation. So we wanted to do GSAP.to, and animate in is going to be from a hidden state into a reveal state. So what we want to do is to wrap this div that we have here, that having all of our images, in another div, and set a reference to EL. And then let's just give it some classes as well. And we're gonna go with vfull, hfull, and then relative. And now we need to create the reference. So EL null. Let's just move the content down here to where we use it. So we want to animate the EL value to a clip path of insert 0%, 0%, 0%, 0%. And we want the duration to be 0.455, and we want the ease to be power2, ease in out. Also here at the beginning, let's do a kill tweens off. So gsap.kill tweens off, el the value, just to make sure like that if we move the mouse fast over the list, that it doesn't junk up any of the animation. So how do we even like trigger this when this is only the box and we don't really hover the box? So the way we can do it is to expose this animate in animation. So we can do a define expose and then make an object as the argument and then type animate in. And now inside of an index file where we have the list box down here, we can do a new reference to the box. We can define it up here. So const box equals reference null. And now here we could do a mouse enter and then do box dot animate in. So what define expose does is that it can expose like either methods or references, constants, values, whatever from this component. So as soon as you use the reference of a Vue component in another component, it exposes what is defined in the define expose that you can then call or use in the parent component. So that's something new that's in Vue3. So to kind of like have the initial state of the box, we need to apply the clip path to the element right now. So let's just make a style and then write clip path and say 0%, 0%, 100%, and 0%. And we need to wrap this in insert. So let's see what we got now. So you can see now that when we enter the list, the image is getting revealed with the clip path animation starting from the top going to the bottom. But we can also see that when we leave the list, there's nothing happening. So kind of like what we did also with the enter and leave animation previously, we just need to copy the animate in. And make it animate out. And then set it to 100%. And then expose animate out. And then inside of our index, we can do a mouse leave and do box.animate out. And let's see what we got now. So now you can see when we start entering the list, the image is getting revealed. And when we remove the cursor from the list, the image is getting hidden. And the same goes for the bottom. So that's how we implement the reveal and unreveal animation to the list. So next we want to look at implementing this parallax kind of effect that we want on the images when we move the mouse from the left to the right and from the top to the bottom. So if we just look at a demo real quick, then we can see that every time I move the cursor, the image kind of like paints a bit more to the right, and when I move left, it paints a bit more to the left, so I reveal more the image, and the same goes with the move the mouse up and down. So yeah, let's look at how we can implement that. So what we want to start with is that we want to calculate the position of the mouse on the individual line items. So let's just start off by making a new event listener down here. So let's make a mouse move and then on move method. So up here, let's do const mouse move equals a new function. And the first argument is going to be the mouse move event. And in here, we want to start off by calculating the bounds, or the different dimensions of the elements. So let's do const bounds equals el, the value, which is the reference that we set down here, dot get bounding client rect. And what we need to get here is the X and the Y position, the top and left, and we need the width and the height. So we could do something like saying that X equals the left property and Y equals the top property. And let's just do width and height. Now we need to calculate the progression. So if we just look at what we got right now, so when my cursor is all the way here to the right, we want it to be 100%, and over here we want it to be 0%, and the same goes for vertical, so 0% and 100%. So to get that progression, we need to calculate it. And let's just do const progression, and y equals, and we need to calculate it by doing 1 divided by the height, so we get it 0 to 1, and then times e.client y minus the top. And then we need to do the same thing for the x value. Instead of the height, we need to do it with the width. And instead of y here, we need to x, and top we need to do left. So now we have the progression, which returns a value between 0 and 1. And what we really want is to, if we just look at what we got right now, is that as soon as we're here in the middle, we want it to be 0, 0, so no parallax at all. But when we're all the way to the right, we want it to pan all the way to the right, and on the left, we want it to pan all the way to the left. So what we really want is a value between a -1 and 1. So to convert it into -1 to 1 range instead of the 0 to 1 range, we need to do const x equals interpolate, which is the same function that we got from the GSAP. And then we want it to go from -1 till 1. And the progression is the progression.x. And we do the same for the y. So progression to y. And then we can emit the x and the y value. And then we need to send the index as well. So that is props.index. And up here in the emits, we need to add it into an array and add the move event as well. There we go. And we just want to add the move name here at the first param. And now, instead of an index file, we can listen for the move and do an on move method. So here, const on move equals, and what we're getting here is the x, the y, and the index. So what we want to do now, we want to keep track of the x and y value for each index. So what we can do is do const offsets equals a reference and an object, and then do offsets the value index equals x and y. So what that gives us is a list of the different offsets for each index. So what we could do is just to do offset equals offsets active index. And since this could be undefined, we need to add a default values that could be x0 and y0. And now inside of our list box, we need to define the property. So let's do offset of a type object required true. And then down here, we need to set the styling. So style transform, and then we want to do translate x and translate y, and we set the scale to 1.25. So what we want to do here is to take half of the 25, 12.5, and times the offset x and add a percentage, and do the exact same thing over here for the y. So offset the y, and let's see what that gives us. So now you can see here in the first image, it looks fine. Every time I move the mouse, it looks great. But as soon as I move down to the next image, you can see we have this jump. And that's because like we have this crossfade. So the new position of the new image is getting, overridden too quickly. So what we rather want to do than maybe just pushing the specific index in here is to maybe just put all of the offsets in. So just let's rename this accordingly. And then inside the list box, let's call this offsets. And then down here, let's do the index, and then let's put the optional chaining, and then add a default to 0 if nothing is set. Let's see how that works. So we can see that the first image is still looking good. And now if we move down to the image below, we don't have this hard transition between them because each individual offset is applied individually inside of the box container. So that is how we implement the parallax effect to the image while hovering the items. So the final thing that we need to do is to add this rotation skewing effect when we move the mouse. So if you just look at the demo real quick, then we can see that when I move my mouse, it skews just a little bit to either side, depending on the mouse direction. And if I move the mouse very quickly, you can see it has much more velocity. So what we need to do here in the list box is that we have to go all the way up here to our existing mouse move. So right now we're keeping track of the positions of the mouse through the event client X and client Y, but we also want to keep a reference on what the last position was. So let's just do a new const up here. So let's call it pref X and set it to a reference of 0. And then down here on our request animation frame, we're just gonna do pref X dot value equals to X dot value. So every time we do an iteration, we want to set the previous position of the mouse, or at least at the X value, to the new variable. And then just above here, we want to now calculate the distance that the mouse has traveled between the last two iterations. So the way we do that is to take the pref X dot value and subtract the X value and just make it into a const. Let's call it distance. And right now, because we can go both directions, that this could be a high number and this could be a low number, the result of this could both be a negative number and a positive number. So to always have a positive number to work with, we're just gonna wrap it in an math apps method. So it always is a positive integer. And then we also want to clamp the value, because right now the value here can be everything from 0 to 1,000 pixels that we move the mouse. So to clamp, you're just going to go into the GSAP and import the clamp method. And then down here, again, at the distance, we can wrap the whole math apps into a clamp. And we can see here from the documentation that we have the minimum number and the maximum number. So let's say that we want a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 100. So now the number here can never exceed 100 pixels. So the next thing we want to do is to calculate the rotation. So if we do a const rotation, and what we want to do here is to map a range. So if you go up here to the GSAP and we then import the map range method, and we just use it down here, map range. So the map range is a method of converting one range over to another range. So we have now a minimum in value, which is going to be 0. And we have the maximum in value, which is going to be 100. That was the 100 we put up here in our clamp, so 0 and 100. And then we have the out range. So we have the out minimum, which is going to be 0 degrees. And then we have the max value, which is going to be 45 degrees. And then the progression here is going to be the distance. So we have a range of 0 to 100, and let's say that the distance here is 50 pixels, which is half. Then it's going to get half between 0 and 45. So maybe the first thing here is just to log the rotation and see what we get. So console log rotation. So we can see here that we have the rotation echoed in the console all the time because of request animation frame. And you can see now, as when I move, now the rotation changes. And you can see if I move it really fast, it never goes above 45. But one thing here, which is I'm just going to show you. So we're just going to apply the rotation. Let's see here. So on the top div here, let's just set a reference. So let's do ref box and then add it up here to our references. So here const box equals a reference of null. And then we can inside of our request animation frame set GSAP.set box.value, and then we can just set rotation as the parameter here. So let's see what that gives us. So every time I move, you can see that it just kind of like goes hard over to the new rotation, and you can always see that it always kind of like want to go to the right and never to the left. So there's two things happening here. So we need the 45 to be either a negative or a positive. So depending on the direction that we're moving, we need to convert that into a positive or negative. So to get the direction, we need to take the ref x.value and subtract it from the x.value. And if that is less than 0, we want to be 45. Otherwise, we want it to be a negative 45. So let's see what that does. So in here, you can see now that it shifts to both directions depending on which way we move the mouse. But again, we have this super junky effect. So the thing here is that we need to take this rotation constant and we need to move it outside of a request animation frame. So let's just put it down here. It doesn't have to be a reference. So we can actually just do something like let rotation equals 0. And then down here, instead of doing the const, we can just say rotation. And what we need now is to make an interpolate of this. So let's just cut this out and do interpolate. And the start value is going to be rotation, so the current value, and the value, int value, is going to be the map range. And we wanted to do the progression at 0.08 as we did previously. Then let's see what that gives us. So now you can see it's much more smooth because of the calculations being interpolated. And you can see if I move the mouse just very, very little, there's not much of velocity. And if I move the mouse very quickly, there's a lot of velocity. And that's it, we're done. Thank you so much for following this video tutorial. I know it's been a long one, but we also covered a lot of different techniques. And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to know when I put up new content, please hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so you're sure you get the notifications. I will put all the links to both modules and documentation and the GitHub down in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next video.